The Galactic Military Academy on Nexus Prime had seen many species walk through its halls over the centuries. Towering Krillian warriors with their chitinous armor and razor-sharp claws. Ethereal Zephyrians who could phase through solid matter. The mighty Gorvax, whose strength could crush steel with bare hands. But never had the instructors encountered anything quite like the small human who stood barely reaching the knees of most other cadets. Zara Chen measured just under 5 feet tall, her dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun that somehow made her look even younger than her 18 standard years. While other species sent their warriors at the peak of physical maturity, humans had this peculiar habit of sending their offspring when they were still growing. The other cadets whispered among themselves, wondering how such a fragile-looking creature had even passed the entrance examinations. The Academy's reputation stretched across 17 sectors. Only the finest warriors from each species earned the right to train here, learning advanced combat techniques, stellar navigation, and the art of war that had kept the galaxy in relative peace for 300 years. The dropout rate exceeded 70% in the first month alone. Most species considered graduation from Nexus Prime the highest military honor possible. Commander Vextar, a 7-foot-tall Krillian with battle scars covering his exoskeleton, watched the latest batch of recruits assemble in the main courtyard. His compound eyes swept over the familiar sight of various alien physiologies, but kept returning to the small human female who stood with perfect posture despite being dwarfed by everyone around her. Intelligence reports indicated humans were a relatively new species to the galactic community, having only achieved faster-than-light travel within the last century. Their planet Earth was considered a minor world on the outer rim, barely worth mentioning in most strategic assessments. The opening ceremony commenced with traditional displays of strength from each species. The Gorvax lifted massive stone blocks above their heads. The Zephyrians demonstrated their phasing abilities by walking through solid walls. The Krillians engaged in ritual combat that would have been lethal to most other species. When the humans' turn arrived, Zara simply stepped forward and began dismantling a complex puzzle lock that had stumped xenoarchaeologists for decades. Her small fingers moved with precise efficiency, solving the ancient mechanism in under 2 minutes while the assembled crowd watched in confused silence. Interesting approach, Commander Vextar noted to his aide. Most species would have tried to break it with force. The first weeks of training revealed the vast differences between species. Physical conditioning separated the cadets into clear hierarchies. The Gorvax dominated strength exercises, easily outlifting beings twice their size. The insectoid Mantari excelled at flexibility and precision. The aquatic Levians showed remarkable endurance in underwater trials. Zara consistently ranked near the bottom in pure physical metrics, struggling with weight requirements designed for beings with fundamentally different physiology. But something strange began happening during tactical simulations. While other cadets relied on their species' natural advantages, Zara approached every challenge from unexpected angles. During a hostage rescue scenario, instead of engaging the enemy directly like the Gorvac cadets, or trying to sneak past like the Zephyrians, she spent precious minutes studying the facility's blueprints. When the other teams had either failed through direct assault or gotten caught during infiltration, Zara led her mixed-species squad through the building's water recycling system, emerging behind the enemy positions and completing the mission with 0 casualties. The instructors began paying closer attention to the small human. Her test scores in strategy and tactics consistently ranked in the top 5%, despite her physical limitations. During live fire exercises, while other cadets focused on superior firepower or advanced technology, Zara demonstrated an uncanny ability to predict enemy movements and position her team for maximum advantage with minimal resources. Lieutenant Commander Thissa, a Zephyrian instructor specializing in advanced tactics, found herself intrigued by the human's unconventional thinking. During one particularly challenging wargame, Zara's team faced overwhelming odds against a force of senior Krillian cadets. Instead of accepting defeat, she convinced her teammates to stage a fake surrender, then used the enemy's moment of victory to launch a coordinated counterattack that captured the opposing team's command structure intact. "How did you know they would fall for the deception?" Thaisa asked during the post-exercise debrief. I watched their previous battles, Zara replied matter-of-factly. Krillians value honor in combat above tactical advantage. They expect their enemies to fight to the last, so a surrender would catch them off guard. Plus, their culture celebrates capturing prisoners over killing them, so they would want to accept our surrender to prove their superiority. The other instructors exchanged glances. Most cadets learned to fight against other species through trial and error, gradually understanding their opponent's capabilities through direct confrontation. This human had studied not just the physical attributes of other species, but their psychological and cultural patterns as well. Word of the unusual human cadet began spreading beyond the academy grounds. Military observers from various species' home governments regularly visited Nexus Prime to monitor their finest warriors in training. The reports they filed became increasingly focused on a single subject: the tiny human who seemed to win battles through sheer analysis and adaptation rather than superior force. During the third month of training, a major incident changed everything. A Gorvak cadet named Thorgrim, standing 8 feet tall and weighing over 600 pounds, had grown increasingly frustrated with Zara's success in tactical exercises. His species valued direct confrontation and personal strength above all else, and the human's indirect methods seemed like cowardice to his cultural perspective. The confrontation occurred during a mixed combat exercise in the Academy's forest training ground. Thorgrim cornered Zara away from the other cadets, his massive fists clenched as he towered over her diminutive form. "You make mockery of warrior training, little human," he growled in heavily accented Standard Galactic. "Time to learn what real strength means." Zara looked up at the massive alien, her expression calm despite the obvious physical mismatch. "Thorgrim, we're supposed to be teammates in this exercise. Fighting each other won't help us complete the mission." "Mission is for weaklings who hide behind tricks," he snarled, raising his fist. "Fight me properly, or I crush you like insect." What happened next became legend among Academy instructors. Zara didn't run, didn't call for help, and didn't try to fight the Gorvak directly. Instead, she stepped backward toward a massive dead tree that had fallen across a small ravine during the previous season's storms. As Thorgrim charged forward with a roar that shook the forest canopy, Zara dropped to the ground and rolled aside at the last possible second. The 8-foot-tall Gorvak couldn't stop his momentum. He crashed into the dead tree with tremendous force, his 600-pound frame snapping the rotted wood and sending him tumbling 20 feet into the ravine below. Zara peered over the edge to find him trapped under fallen branches, but uninjured thanks to his thick hide, bellowing in frustrated rage. "I'll send rescue teams," she called down to him. "Try not to move too much. Some of those branches look unstable." By the time instructors arrived to extract the embarrassed Gorvak from the ravine, news of the incident had already spread throughout the academy. The tiny human hadn't defeated a much larger opponent through superior strength or advanced technology. She had used her environment, her opponent's psychology, and precise timing to neutralize a threat without causing serious harm. That evening, as cadets gathered in the mess hall, conversations inevitably turned to the forest incident. Representatives from a dozen species debated what they had witnessed, each viewing it through the lens of their own cultural values. "The humans showed cowardice," declared a Krillian cadet. "True warriors face their enemies with honor, not tricks and deception." "She demonstrated superior tactical thinking," countered a Mantari, their insectoid features clicking with approval. "Using available resources efficiently shows intelligence." "But she didn't actually defeat him," pointed out a Zephyrian. "She merely delayed the confrontation." An elderly Levian instructor who had been listening to the debate finally spoke up, his whale-like voice carrying across the hall. "You're all missing the point. The human didn't seek to defeat her opponent or prove her superiority. She neutralized a threat while ensuring minimal harm to all parties involved. That requires a level of restraint and strategic thinking most warriors never develop." The debates continued long into the night, but one thing had become clear to every observer. This small human represented something new in galactic military thinking. While other species had evolved specific advantages, strength, speed, natural weapons, or technological aptitude, humans seem to have developed the ability to analyze and adapt to any situation using nothing but observation and creative problem-solving. In the weeks that followed, Zara found herself both celebrated and scrutinized by instructors and cadets alike. Some viewed her methods as revolutionary thinking that could transform military strategy. Others considered her approach a form of elaborate cowardice that had no place in honorable combat. But everyone agreed on one thing. The small human from the insignificant outer rim world was unlike anything they had ever encountered. What none of them realized was that this was only the beginning. Zara Chen represented more than just an unusual individual. She was the first glimpse of humanity's true potential in a galaxy that had grown comfortable with predictable patterns of warfare and diplomacy. The universe was about to learn that sometimes the smallest package contained the greatest surprises. The Academy's routine continued, but something fundamental had shifted in the way instructors evaluated their cadets. For the first time in centuries, they began questioning whether raw physical power and species-specific advantages were truly the measures of military excellence. The tiny human who struggled with basic strength requirements was forcing an entire galactic civilization to reconsider what it meant to be a warrior. As Zara stood in her small quarters that night, looking out at the stars through her window, she had no idea that military observers across 17 sectors were filing reports about her unconventional methods. She was simply focused on tomorrow's challenges, already analyzing the patterns she had observed in her instructor's training methods and wondering how she might improve her team's performance in the upcoming survival exercises. But in governmental buildings and military headquarters across the galaxy, a new conversation was beginning. A conversation about a species that seemed to approach warfare not as a display of superior force, but as a complex puzzle to be solved through understanding, adaptation, and creative thinking. The implications would soon reach far beyond a single military academy on Nexus Prime. Admiral Keithvar had commanded the Nexus Defense Fleet for over 2 decades, earning respect throughout the galaxy for his tactical brilliance and unwavering dedication to protecting civilized worlds from the ever-present threat of raiders and hostile forces. Standing nearly 9 feet tall with the characteristic blue-scaled hide and crown of neural spines that marked him as one of the elite Draconian officer caste, he commanded attention simply by entering a room. His reputation as the galaxy's finest military strategist was well earned through countless successful campaigns against pirates, territorial disputes, and the occasional aggressive species seeking to expand their borders through conquest. The Admiral rarely concerned himself with individual cadets at the Academy. Nexus Prime churned out hundreds of competent officers each year, most of whom would serve adequately in various fleet positions before retiring to comfortable civilian lives. Exceptional individuals might catch his notice through remarkable performances in advanced simulations or demonstrations of leadership potential. But never had a first-year cadet's activities reached his personal attention through a steady stream of increasingly unusual reports. "Sir, we have another incident report from the Academy," announced his aide, Commander Velthak, a efficient Mentari whose compound eyes never missed important details. "The human cadet again." Admiral Kethvar gestured for the report while continuing to study star charts showing recent pirate activity in the outer sectors. "What did she do this time? Solve another impossible tactical scenario through unconventional means?" "Actually, sir, this one is different. She prevented what could have been a serious diplomatic incident between the Gorvak and Zephyrian contingents." That got the Admiral's attention. Interspecies tensions at the Academy were carefully managed through centuries of established protocols, but occasionally the fundamental differences between species created conflicts that required delicate handling. The Gorvaks valued direct confrontation and personal honor above all else, while the Zephyrians preferred subtle manipulation and indirect approaches to problem-solving. These philosophical differences had sparked everything from individual fights to small wars throughout galactic history. The report detailed how tensions had been building for weeks between the Gorvak cadets, led by the recently humiliated Thorgrim, and a group of Zephyrian cadets who had been making barely concealed comments about primitive thinking and brute force solutions during tactical exercises. The situation had escalated when the Zephyrians used their phasing abilities to relocate the Gorvak ceremonial weapons as a prank, not understanding that touching another warrior's weapons was considered a grave insult in Gorvak culture. By the time instructors became aware of the problem, both groups were preparing for what amounted to a species-wide brawl that could have resulted in serious injuries and potentially created diplomatic problems between their respective home governments. Academy protocols called for immediate intervention by senior staff, likely resulting in disciplinary action against both groups and possible expulsion of the ringleaders. Instead, Zara had approached both groups separately with what appeared to be a simple request for help with her own training. She asked the Gorvaks to teach her proper weapon maintenance techniques, showing genuine respect for their craftsmanship and warrior traditions. To the Zephyrians, she requested assistance with stealth and infiltration methods, acknowledging their superior abilities in those areas. What seemed like innocent requests for tutoring became something more significant. The humans somehow convinced both groups that teaching her their specialized skills would be more valuable than fighting each other, Commander Velthak continued. She suggested that true superiority comes from being able to pass knowledge to others, not from defeating them in combat. Admiral Kethvar set down the star charts and focused his full attention on the report. She manipulated both groups into competing to see who could be better teachers rather than better fighters? It appears so, sir, but there's more. During the teaching sessions, she began asking questions that forced both groups to analyze their own methods more deeply. The Gorvaks had to explain why their techniques worked, which made them think more strategically about combat. The Zephyrians had to demonstrate their abilities step by step, which gave them new appreciation for the precision required. The Admiral found himself genuinely intrigued. Most diplomatic solutions to interspecies conflicts involved external arbitration or formal protocols that address symptoms rather than underlying causes. This human cadet had apparently identified the root of the problem, each group's need to feel superior, and redirected that competitive energy into mutual benefit. What was the outcome? Both groups are now regularly conducting joint training exercises. The Gorvaks are learning to incorporate stealth tactics into their assault strategies, while the Zephyrians are developing appreciation for direct approaches when subtlety isn't effective. The human has become an unofficial liaison between them. Admiral Kethvar leaned back in his command chair, processing the implications. In his 20 years of fleet command, he had seen countless examples of species working together effectively, but usually only after extensive cultural sensitivity training and careful management of potential friction points. This first-year cadet had apparently achieved the same result through simple conversation and what appeared to be genuine curiosity about other cultures. Commander, pull all reports related to this human cadet. I want to review her complete academy record. Over the following hours, Admiral Kethvar read through increasingly remarkable accounts of Zara's activities at Nexus Prime. Her academic performance was solid but not exceptional. Good grades in theoretical studies, adequate marks in physical training, excellent scores in tactical analysis. What made her unusual wasn't her individual achievements, but her consistent ability to improve team performance regardless of which cadets she worked with. During survival exercises, she had convinced a group of carnivorous Krillians to share rations with herbivorous Centauri by pointing out that keeping everyone at peak performance would improve their overall chances of success. In navigation challenges, she had helped competing teams work together to solve complex astrogation problems by suggesting that reaching the destination safely was more important than arriving first. During combat simulations, she had developed hybrid strategies that combined the best aspects of different species approaches, creating tactics that were more effective than any single cultural approach. But what impressed the Admiral most was a detailed after-action report from Lieutenant Commander Thissa describing a recent wargame exercise. The scenario had involved a complex multi-party conflict with unclear objectives and shifting alliances, designed to test cadets' ability to function in the kind of chaotic situations they might encounter in actual field operations. Most teams had approached the exercise by trying to identify the strongest faction and either ally with them or eliminate them first, following conventional military wisdom about power dynamics. Zara's team had taken a completely different approach. Instead of focusing on military strength, they had spent the initial phase of the exercise gathering intelligence about each faction's actual goals and motivations. They discovered that several groups were fighting not because they wanted to defeat each other, but because they misunderstood what the others were trying to achieve. Rather than engaging in combat, Zara's team had positioned themselves as mediators, facilitating negotiations that allowed multiple factions to achieve their objectives without continued warfare. The exercise had ended with Zara's team controlling the largest territory and maintaining positive relationships with most other factions, while the teams that had focused on military conquest were still engaged in resource-draining conflicts with unclear outcomes. The instructors had initially been unsure how to score the results, since the scenario wasn't designed to have a diplomatic solution. Most interesting, Admiral Kethvar murmured to himself as he finished reviewing the reports. This human cadet wasn't just thinking creatively about individual challenges. She was approaching warfare itself from a fundamentally different perspective than any species he had encountered. His contemplation was interrupted by an urgent communication from Fleet Command. Long-range sensors had detected unusual activity in the Kalian sector, where a confederation of minor species had been engaged in an increasingly violent territorial dispute. The situation had been simmering for months, with each species claiming historical rights to various star systems and refusing to acknowledge the other's positions. Recent escalations suggested the conflict might soon spread to neighboring sectors, potentially disrupting trade routes and requiring major fleet intervention. "Sir," Commander Velthak announced, "Fleet Command is requesting our recommendation for managing the Kalion situation. The diplomatic corps has been unable to make progress, and the Defense Council is considering military intervention to enforce a ceasefire." Admiral Kethvar studied the tactical displays showing fleet positions and conflict zones, but found his thoughts drifting to the Academy reports he had just finished reading. Traditional approaches to the Kalian problem would involve either massive fleet deployment to intimidate all parties into compliance, or backing the strongest faction and helping them establish control over the disputed territories. Both options would likely result in significant casualties and long-term resentment that could flare into future conflicts. "Commander, how quickly could we arrange a field exercise for senior Academy cadets?" "Sir, field exercises typically require several weeks of planning and coordination with multiple departments. I'm thinking of something more immediate, a real-world application of their training under controlled conditions." The Admiral activated his personal communication system and opened a direct channel to Academy Command. "This is Admiral Kethvar. I need to speak with your senior staff immediately regarding an unconventional training opportunity." Within hours, a plan had been formulated that was unprecedented in Academy history. A carefully selected group of senior cadets would be deployed to the Kalian sector as military observers attached to Admiral Kethvar's flagship. Their official mission would be to study real-world conflict resolution techniques and report on their observations. Unofficially, the Admiral was curious to see how different species' approaches to diplomacy and strategy would work in an actual crisis situation. The selection committee faced an unusual dilemma when choosing the cadet roster. Standard protocols called for the highest-ranking students in each category: top tactical scores, best physical performance, strongest leadership evaluations. But Admiral Kethvar had specifically requested that the team include cadets who demonstrated innovative thinking and cross-species cooperation abilities. Zara Chen's name appeared on the final roster, despite being only a first-year cadet with no advanced training in diplomacy or interstellar relations. Several senior instructors questioned the decision, pointing out that she lacked the experience and formal qualifications typically required for such assignments. But Admiral Kethvar had been quite specific about wanting to observe unconventional approaches to complex problems. When the news reached Zara, she was in the middle of helping a group of aquatic Levians and desert Tharaki work together on an engineering project that required combining underwater and arid environment technologies. Her first reaction was confusion rather than excitement. "Are you certain there hasn't been a mistake?" she asked Commander Vextar, who had delivered the assignment notification. "I'm still struggling with basic combat certifications. This seems like it should go to someone with more experience." The Admiral specifically requested cadets with diverse perspectives and proven ability to work with multiple species, the Krillian commander replied. "Your recent performance evaluations suggest you meet those criteria." Zara spent the evening preparing for the mission by researching everything available about the Kalian sector conflict. The historical data painted a complex picture of legitimate grievances and mutual misunderstandings that had escalated far beyond their original scope. Each species involved had valid claims to various systems based on different criteria: first exploration, longest continuous habitation, largest current population, most advanced terraforming efforts, strategic defensive value. What struck her as she read through diplomatic reports and intelligence assessments was how each party seemed to be arguing from completely different frameworks. The Zenthari valued first discovery and exploration rights. The Mollusk Federation based their claims on successful long-term colonization. The Silicon Collective focused on their technological improvements to marginal worlds. The Wanderer clans emphasized their nomadic people's need for safe harbor systems. None of them were necessarily wrong, but they weren't really arguing about the same things either. It was like watching beings debate whether blue was better than seven, or whether music was more valuable than architecture. Each side was using their own cultural values to measure completely different criteria. As her transport prepared for departure to Admiral Kethvar's flagship, Zara found herself wondering if anyone had ever tried to map out what each species actually needed versus what they were demanding. Sometimes the solution to a problem became clearer when you stopped focusing on the positions people had taken and started examining the underlying interests that motivated those positions. She had no idea that similar thoughts were occurring to Admiral Kethvar himself, or that her upcoming deployment would become the first test of whether humanity's strange approach to conflict resolution could work on an interstellar scale. The galaxy was about to discover that their newest species brought more than just unusual individuals to the cosmic community. They brought an entirely different way of thinking about problems that had seemed unsolvable for generations. The bridge of the Nexus flagship, Eternal Vigilance, represented the pinnacle of galactic military engineering. Its command center, designed to coordinate fleet operations across multiple star systems simultaneously. Admiral Kethvar stood before the main tactical display, watching sensor readings from the Kalion sector with growing concern. What had begun as a territorial dispute between four species was rapidly escalating into something that could destabilize the entire region. "Admiral, the latest intelligence reports from the sector," announced Lieutenant Commander Thissa, who had been temporarily reassigned from Academy duty to serve as liaison for the cadet observation mission. "The Zenthari have moved 3 cruiser squadrons into the disputed systems, and the Mollusk Federation is mobilizing their defensive fleets. Our diplomatic teams are reporting complete communication breakdown between all parties." Admiral Kethvar nodded grimly. Traditional fleet doctrine called for immediate intervention at this point, establishing a neutral zone between the combatants and enforcing a ceasefire through overwhelming force. It was an approach that had worked countless times before, but usually left underlying tensions unresolved, requiring ongoing military presence and eventual re-escalation. "What is the assessment from our cadet observers?" he asked, curious to hear how the Academy's finest future officers viewed the developing crisis. The senior cadets had spent the previous day reviewing intelligence data and conducting analysis sessions. Representatives from 6 different species had approached the problem using their respective cultures' standard diplomatic and military frameworks. The Krillian cadets recommended immediate shows of force to establish clear boundaries. The Zephyrian representatives suggested complex intelligence operations to undermine each faction's resolve. The Gorvak observers advocated for identifying the strongest party and negotiating from a position of backing superior force. "The consensus recommendation is for graduated fleet deployment," Lieutenant Commander Thissa reported. "Establish overwhelming presence, impose ceasefire conditions, and begin formal arbitration under Galactic Council protocols. Estimated timeline for resolution, 6 to 12 months with ongoing fleet commitment required." And the minority opinion? Cadet Chen has submitted a separate analysis suggesting an alternative approach. Admiral Kethvar found himself unsurprised. "What does our human cadet propose?" She requests permission to review direct communications from each faction rather than intelligence summaries. Her preliminary assessment suggests the conflict may be based on fundamental misunderstandings that could be addressed through unconventional mediation techniques. The Admiral studied the tactical display, showing the positions of various fleets, all maneuvering for strategic advantage in what was rapidly becoming an inevitable shooting war. Hundreds of thousands of beings across multiple species were preparing for battle over star systems that could theoretically support all of them if approached creatively. Grant Cadet Chen access to the raw communication logs and schedule a briefing with all cadet observers in 2 hours. During the interim, Admiral Kethvar found himself reviewing Zara's Academy records again, particularly her approach to seemingly impossible scenarios. Her methods consistently involved looking beyond the obvious surface conflicts to identify underlying motivations and needs that weren't being directly addressed. It was an approach that seemed almost too simple to work in complex interstellar situations, but her track record suggested otherwise. When the briefing convened, the assembled cadets presented their analysis using standard military assessment protocols: fleet positions, resource availability, probable outcomes of various intervention scenarios, estimated casualties for different approaches. It was professional, thorough, and utterly conventional. Cadet Chen, your assessment differs from your colleagues? Zara stood to address the Admiral, still the smallest being in the room by a considerable margin, but her voice carried clearly as she activated the main display. Sir, I believe we've been approaching this situation based on incorrect assumptions about what each faction actually wants. The display showed a complex chart mapping each species' stated demands against their underlying capabilities and historical behavior patterns. The Zenthari claim they need these systems for expansion space, but their population growth rate doesn't support large-scale colonization efforts. The Mollusk Federation demands exclusive fishing rights to oceanic worlds, but they're already struggling to develop the systems they currently control. The Silicon Collective wants mining rights to support their manufacturing base, but their technology allows them to extract resources from previously unusable worlds. The Wanderer clans require safe harbor systems, but they've historically avoided permanent settlements. Admiral Kethavar studied the analysis, noting how Zara had correlated economic data, cultural anthropology reports, and resource surveys in ways that revealed patterns invisible in standard military intelligence summaries. Continue. None of them actually need what they're demanding from these particular systems, but they're all afraid that the others will get something that makes them more vulnerable. The Zenthari fear being surrounded by hostile settlements. The mollusks worry about losing access to trade routes. The Silicon Collective needs guaranteed resource access for their manufacturing centers. The Wanderers want assurance they won't be blocked from traditional migration patterns. The human cadet touched a control, and the display shifted to show proposed alternative arrangements. If we address their actual security and economic needs rather than their territorial demands, everyone can get what they require without anyone losing what they need. The room fell silent as beings from 6 different species processed this analysis. Admiral Kethvar found himself genuinely intrigued by the approach, though years of military experience made him skeptical of solutions that seemed too elegant. Cadet Chen, your proposal assumes these factions would be willing to negotiate in good faith once their real interests are addressed. Current intelligence suggests they've moved past rational discourse to preparation for military action. Yes, sir, but that's because they think their only options are winning or losing the current territorial disputes. If we present them with alternatives that address their underlying concerns, they might be willing to step back from combat readiness. And how do you propose we communicate these alternatives when our diplomatic corps has been unable to establish productive dialogue? Zara hesitated for a moment before responding. Sir, I'd like to request permission to attempt direct communication with representatives from each faction, not as a formal diplomatic initiative, but as a learning exercise for Academy cadets to observe real-world negotiation techniques. The request was so unprecedented that Admiral Kethvar wasn't certain such authority existed within Academy protocols. First-year cadets simply didn't engage in interstellar diplomacy, particularly not during active military crises. The potential for disaster was enormous if inexperienced personnel made cultural mistakes or inadvertently escalated tensions. But conventional approaches weren't working, and the alternative was a military intervention that would likely result in significant casualties while failing to address the root causes of the conflict. More importantly, this human cadet had consistently demonstrated ability to find solutions that more experienced personnel had missed. Lieutenant Commander Thissa, what is your assessment of the risk factors involved in Cadet Chen's proposal? The Zephyrian officer considered carefully before responding. Sir, the cadet has shown remarkable aptitude for cross-species communication and conflict resolution. However, the stakes involved in this situation far exceed anything she has previously encountered. A single miscommunication could trigger the very war we're trying to prevent. What safeguards would you recommend? Real-time monitoring of all communications with immediate intervention capability if the situation begins to deteriorate. Multiple backup plans for diplomatic and military responses. And clear protocols for terminating the initiative if it proves counterproductive. Admiral Kethvar found himself facing a decision that could affect the careers of everyone involved and potentially influence the fate of millions of beings across the disputed systems. Standard military doctrine provided clear guidance for traditional approaches, but this situation was beginning to require thinking that went beyond established procedures. Cadet Chen, you understand that failure in this initiative could result in immediate termination of your academy training and potential disciplinary action for any officers who supported your involvement? Yes, sir. But if conventional approaches were going to work, they would have succeeded by now. Someone needs to try something different before this escalates to actual warfare. The Admiral studied the young human's expression, noting the absence of bravado or overconfidence. She understood the magnitude of what she was proposing and the personal risks involved, but seemed genuinely convinced that her approach offered possibilities that traditional methods couldn't achieve. Lieutenant Commander Thissa, implement monitoring protocols for experimental diplomatic contact. Cadet Chen, you have authorization to attempt communication with faction representatives under strict supervision. Any sign of deteriorating conditions will result in immediate termination of this initiative. Over the following hours, Admiral Kethvar watched something unprecedented unfold on his flagship. Rather than approaching each faction as an external mediator trying to impose solutions, Zara positioned herself as a student, seeking to understand their perspectives and concerns. She asked questions that demonstrated genuine curiosity about their cultures, histories, and motivations rather than trying to immediately address their territorial disputes. The breakthrough came when she began sharing information between factions about aspects of their concerns that weren't actually competitive. The Zenthari learned that the Wanderer clans had no interest in establishing permanent settlements that would block expansion routes. The mollusks discovered that the Silicon Collective's mining techniques could actually improve oceanic ecosystem health in certain circumstances. The Wanderers found out that the Zenthari's exploration protocols included provisions for protecting nomadic people's traditional paths. They're not really enemies, Zara explained to Admiral Kethvar during a briefing update. They're all responding to fear of threats that don't actually exist. Once they understand what each other actually wants, the territorial disputes become much more manageable. But the real test came when Zara proposed something that made Admiral Kethvar question whether he had made a serious error in judgment. Instead of trying to divide the disputed systems among the four factions, she suggested they work together to develop the entire region as a joint venture that could benefit everyone simultaneously. Cadet, that level of cooperation between species with no history of alliance and significant cultural differences approaches impossibility. You're proposing they trust each other with their most vital interests. Sir, trust isn't required initially. Mutual benefit is enough to start with. If they can see immediate advantages to cooperation and minimal risk to their core interests, they might be willing to try limited joint projects. Success in small ventures can build the foundation for larger cooperative efforts. Admiral Kethvar watched the communication logs as Zara walked each faction through scenarios showing how cooperative development could provide them with more than they could achieve through territorial control. The Zenthari could gain access to more expansion opportunities through shared infrastructure. The mollusks could develop oceanic resources more efficiently through Silicon Collective technology. The collective could access new resource sources through Wanderer knowledge of unexplored systems. The Wanderers could secure protected routes through formal agreements rather than uncertain territorial control. What amazed the Admiral most was how Zara managed to present these proposals without making any faction feel like they were surrendering their legitimate interests or accepting inferior positions. Instead of framing cooperation as compromise, she positioned it as optimization that allowed everyone to achieve more than they had originally thought possible. The final communication session lasted 18 hours. with representatives from all four factions working through details of potential cooperative arrangements under Zara's careful facilitation. By the end, they had outlined framework agreements that addressed everyone's core concerns while establishing mechanisms for ongoing collaboration and dispute resolution. Admiral, Lieutenant Commander Thysa reported, all factions are requesting formal diplomatic channels to finalize the agreements developed during these sessions. Fleet mobilization in the sector has been suspended pending successful completion of negotiations. Admiral Kethvar looked at the tactical display, now showing fleets standing down from combat readiness and moving toward neutral positions for the first time in months. A crisis that had seemed certain to result in interstellar warfare had been resolved through the intervention of a first-year Academy cadet who approached the entire situation from a perspective that no one else had considered. Cadet Chen, your performance in this situation has been remarkable. I believe formal recognition is warranted for contributions that exceeded all reasonable expectations for someone at your level of training. But as Admiral Kethavar prepared commendation reports that would eventually reach the highest levels of galactic government, he realized that recognition for individual achievement missed the larger implications of what had occurred. This human cadet hadn't just solved a specific crisis through exceptional personal ability. She had demonstrated that her species approached conflict resolution using fundamentally different assumptions about what was possible when beings worked together rather than against each other. Over the following days, as formal diplomatic teams took over the process of finalizing the agreements Zara had initiated, military observers throughout the galaxy began filing reports about humanity's role in the Kalian resolution. The tiny species from the Outer Rim had apparently produced individuals capable of achievements that defied conventional understanding of diplomacy and strategy. But what impressed seasoned military professionals most was not just what the human cadet had accomplished, but how she had approached the entire situation. Where other species saw inevitable competition for limited resources, humans seemed to see opportunities for creative collaboration that expanded possibilities for everyone involved. Where traditional thinking focused on managing conflicts, human thinking appeared to focus on transforming conflicts into cooperative ventures. As the Eternal Vigilance prepared to return to Nexus Prime, Admiral Kethavar found himself contemplating reports from intelligence services across 17 sectors. Humanity was no longer the insignificant Outer Rim species that had barely registered in galactic strategic assessments. They were rapidly becoming recognized as a civilization that brought unprecedented approaches to challenges that had seemed impossible to resolve. Zara spent the return journey helping her fellow cadets analyze what they had observed during the crisis resolution, sharing insights about cross-species psychology and cooperative strategy development. She had no idea that her academy training was about to become significantly more complex, or that every major government in the galaxy was now paying attention to human educational and military development programs. The universe had discovered that sometimes the smallest packages contained the most revolutionary contents. Humanity's gift to galactic civilization wasn't superior technology or overwhelming military force. It was a completely different way of thinking about what became possible when diverse beings worked together toward shared goals rather than fighting over assumed limitations. And for Admiral Kethvar, watching the young human cadet continue her studies with characteristic focus and humility. The most remarkable aspect of the entire experience was that she seemed to consider what had happened perfectly normal. To her, finding ways for different species to achieve mutual benefit through cooperation was simply the obvious approach to any complex challenge. The galaxy was about to learn that humanity's perspective on obvious solutions would continue to surprise everyone for generations to come.